An agreement between the governments of France and Australia resulted in the purchase of the French-designed fixed-wing jet, the Mirage III, for the Royal Australian Air Force, RAAF. The Australian government announced in the late 1950s that it intended to modernize its air force with cutting-edge technology. When the Australian government agreed to purchase over 100 Mirages in the early 1960s at an estimated cost of US $193.7 million, the French manufacturer Dassault beat out Lockheed. Australia became the second country after Israel to purchase Mirage IIIs for export, following a phase of development by General Aeronautique Marcel Dassault, GMD. The first Mirage III took to the air in 1995. This led to a notable increase in French defense exports over the following 20 years, positioning France as the third-largest defense exporter in the world by 1971. The arrangement with Australia, one of the biggest factors in France's export success, had a big influence on the country's foreign policy and helped it gain more clout as it competed with the two Cold War superpowers. The agreement was similarly important for Australia, which had not yet chosen an aircraft to replace the antiquated CSC-27 Avon Sabre in the 1950s. In his defense speech on April 4, 1957, Australian Prime Minister Robert Menzies stated, "Our present planning and preparations are proceeding based on an operational contribution to the Allied strategy of highly trained men armed with the most modern conventional weapons and equipment." The Australian Minister of Defence announced the initial order for 30 Mirage AGOs on December 15, 1960 for 18 million Australian pounds. Additional orders for 30 single-seaters, 40 single-seaters, and 10 two-seaters, Mirage ID, were quickly placed. As part of the inked agreements, the aircraft would also be manufactured in Australia, with SANECMA providing the engines and Dassault providing the airframe components. The government aircraft factories in Melbourne were to handle the fuselage and final assembly, while the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation was to assemble the latter, along with the canopy and rudder. It was decided that the first two aircraft would be constructed in France, 6 more would be shipped with their fuselage, wings and engines disassembled, and 2 more would ultimately arrive in Australia in their unassembled form. At Melun Villaroche Aerodrome, Group Captain Susans accepted delivery of the first aircraft on April 9, 1963. On November 1, 1963, this aircraft was disassembled and flown aboard a Lockheed C-130 Hercules cargo plane. On January 11, 1964, it was assembled upon arrival and flown. On January 19, 1964, the RAAF took it on strength. The first of 10 two-seater models was approved on November 10, 1966. The Australians were greatly influenced by their American partners in the Vietnam War to select the Lockheed F-104G Starfighter. Thus, it was somewhat surprising when the French government, which opposed the war, chose to use the French aircraft. 7 RAAF units operated Mirages, which were first deployed in 1965 and served as frontline aircraft. The first 50 were constructed as interceptors and were designated as Mirage IIIOF. The others were given the designation IO-A and were outfitted with gear for ground assault duties. The Serrano IIB Doppler radar and altimeters were installed, along with a coat of camouflage paint, as the primary improvements to this modification. The Australian government requested that 2-seated versions be constructed between 1973 and 1974 for training purposes when the last 6 were ordered in 1971. The specification was made possible by moving the avionics equipment to the nose and removing the Serrano radar to create space for a second cockpit behind the first. The obsolete Sabre trainers could finally be decommissioned thanks to this 11 million Australian dollars acquisition. All of the original Mirage IIIO aircraft had been converted to ground attack specifications by June 1969. Australia ordered 116 Mirage AE aircraft in total. Before their conversion to F/A-18 Hornets, they were utilized for the advanced training of 77 squadron pilots starting in the mid-1980s. French Matra R-530 missiles were first acquired for armament, and the R-550 Magic was added later in the 1970s. The RAAF's use of the Mirage III came to an end on September 30, 1988. Its Its extended service record was partly caused by the fact that it flew more than the 1,500 flying hours that were projected to be its nominal lifespan. Many Australian Mirages accumulated well over 4,000 hours of flight time. In actuality, the RAAF was preparing to remove the Mirage EE fleet in 1979, particularly since it had been deployed more frequently than anticipated. Nonetheless, Fisherman's Bend's aeronautical research facilities increased the fleet's lifespan by creating fiber repair patches that stopped wing cracks from getting worse. As it happened, the Mirage EE's tenure with the RAAF was nearly 10 years longer than anticipated. In 1990, 50 aircraft, 43 single-seaters, and 7 two-seaters were sold to Pakistan after being stored for storage. On December 20, 1963, the RAAF received the first Mirage aircraft, produced in Australia under license, the Mirage III. It was assigned to IRDU at first, and then to two OCU, 76 SUDN and 77 SUDN at RAAF Base Williamtown. Following its retirement on March 31, 1987, the aircraft was relocated to the Fighter World Aviation Heritage Center, where it is permanently displayed with the dual-seat Mirage EDE/DA3-102, commonly referred to as Daphne de Duel. Embargo dispute. A change in the French government's Middle East policy in 1967 resulted in the retention of 50 Mirages, which were funded by the Israeli government, and a period of conflict between Australia and France. Israel therefore turned to Australia for the production of Mirage aircraft and parts. The French government responded by imposing restrictions on the sale of Mirage parts and ammunition to Australia. This created a misconception that the French were imposing an embargo on military supplies to Australia due to their differences over the Vietnam War. This was not entirely unjustified, since Sweden and Switzerland had already prohibited Australia from using their technology during the war. Therefore, when word leaked out that France had ordered that no RAAF Mirages be sent to Vietnam, thereby threatening to stop supplying ammunition, the idea of an embargo gained credence. Although there were intentions to adapt the Mirages to utilize surplus British ammunition, the Australian government officially dismissed the rumors, noting the fact that another RAAF was already deployed to investigate further Australian-French aircraft collaboration with the Dassault Mirage 2000. When this was uncovered, it sparked a disagreement about royalties for Australian-made ammunition and parts manufactured by the French Direction des Études et Fabrications d'Armement (DFA), and contributed to the spread of more rumors, changes, and Australian participation. The main reasons the Mirage AE was selected over the Lockheed F-104G were that the American fighters were too expensive, too few, and required higher quality airfields that Australia had not yet built, making them unsuitable for use by the RAAF in terms of aircraft handling, engine reliability, and ferry range. Although the Mirage could not meet all of the RAAF's requirements out of the box, it could be modified and was already prepared to be used as a multipurpose aircraft. Based on the preliminary report from the Australian team after evaluating costs, engineering, maintenance, license production, and delivery timetable, it was arranged that Dassault would collaborate with the Australian Air Force to modify the Mirage in several ways. Along with the government aircraft factories, GAF in Melbourne, which had functioned as the Department of Aircraft Production for the Australian government during World War II, the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, CAC, in Australia was brought into the project. CAC had been tasked with creating the previous Sabre aircraft and was still in charge of its production facilities. As an Australian contribution to the Mirage EGI customization process, these firms would assist with the manufacturing side of things. They were also entrusted with working with Dassault, obtaining production drawings, technical data, aircraft components, materials, and equipment from GAMID. The CAC's past involvement in cooperative aircraft projects involving US and UK designs equipped it for this kind of communication. Ted Bennett and Pierce Talbot, the project's two leading Australian engineers, stated that the opportunity to become involved in the production of a supersonic fighter was received with great enthusiasm. The A-32 was retained in France, while the A-31, the first RAAF type ever made, was sent to Australia in 1963. These acted as test prototypes for the adjustments while they were being put into practice. Squadron leader Bill Collings conducted the first Australian flight test in the IIIC in November 1963 at Avalon after 2 completed aircraft packages were sent to the GAA for assembly. The A316 was the first vehicle to use the selected parts that the Australian manufacturers, who had replaced Dassault, had supplied. The RAAF bought 60 of these aircraft, excluding 10 double-seaters for pilot training. Thanks for watching. Kindly like and subscribe for more videos. In the comments section below, please tell me how many you discovered.